Hi, it is your buddy, Peace and Harmony with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful empowered harmonizers. We are zooming in and focusing in on a great viewer question, and that is how to handle the overstimulation or hyperarousal that oftentimes is experienced in the presence of a psychopath. One thing that's important to understand about, and this is in the relation to a female psychopath, someone who's sort of always on them, sort of always in that hyperarousal mode. Really what is known as impulse control or lack of impulse control or need for stimulation within this subgroup of individuals. So to understand this is also to understand that there are differences in the brain structures of the brain of a psychopath versus the normal population. And there's been studies done at University of Wisconsin which look at the brain scans and show differences in the size and connection activity of the amygdala, which is responsible for anxiety and fear, which is shown to have like a thinner outer membrane, showing sort of reduced activity. So meaning they're experiencing less anxiety, less fear, if not none. And then also a result of passivity or a reduced activity between the connection to the prefrontal cortex, which is the area of learning, which is the area of judgment. And so without this, highway moving at the normal speed, or what we would consider that which regulates conscience and learning, the apparatus for learning and good judgment, there is inactivity or slowed connection within the brain scans of these types of individuals. And so this results in also a combination of that the brain neurochemistry is found to show hypersensitivity to the reward chemical called dopamine. Dopamine is the neurochemical which is stimulated and secreted when there's something of a reward, meaning something that that individual wants. It's on full throttle. The pedal, the foot is on the gas pedal. It is flooring it. So these individuals have a compulsion or a need for stimulation more so than the rest of the population. These people might be perceived as having super high energy, doing the impossible, doing the miraculous. I can't believe you're able to do all this. I can't believe you have this much going on. I don't understand how you can simultaneously juggle 2, 3, 4, or more intimate relationships. So this difference in the brain of the psychopath really separates them and distinguishes them from the rest of the population, particularly in the area of need for stimulation, high risk behavior, and also promiscuous behavior. It can also deviate and distort itself in terms of the aggressive acts and all that good stuff, excuse me, which have been found obviously in the activity of those psychopaths who are deemed criminal. And so, but furthermore, looking at this, who you might brush up with, encounter, and actually have relationships with in your day-to-day life or experience. So either in your community, your workplace, your family, etc. This could even be someone who you're dating, married to, have as a family role model. But one thing you need to understand is how to cope with their constant need for stimulation, and then thus what is known as the hyperarousal of others. So, namely, I feel there's an energy that sort of exudes from these individuals. It is palpable, meaning you can almost touch it. There's a tension. A lot of people perceive it as a magnetic-like attraction or a vampiric individual. Vampiric meaning, close to that which is as a vampire or an energy vampire. Back in the day, there was that movie, Vampires, I think it was Brad Pitt, and how they get up and, etc. And, when everyone else is sleeping and, all this, sort of stories and lore that surrounds the vampire. And there's books written about psychic vampires. So there's this feeling of not only are they hyper arousing, but they're leaching energy from you simultaneously. So it's just sort of deceptive and can lean to what is felt to be brainwashing, gaslighting, and sort of cognitive fog. Fear, obligation, and guilt, but then results in this feeling of constantly being sort of challenged, being provoked by this hyper arousal. Hyper arousal can take many forms, whether it's constantly texting, whether it's violating of boundaries, meaning asking you to do things above and beyond which you're comfortable with, but then based on this sort of hyper arousal that they exude and that they participate in behaviorally and socially. A lot of people might then interpret this as being desirable, feeling a need for them. I am wanted. I'm treated, extremely well by this person. They might pay for a lot of meals or your rent, or other things combined during the hyper arousal. So when they're in their dopamine, I want this, and they're on that need for stimulation, and then they pull others into this lifestyle, then, and then it also, not only can it be a social, going out for dinner, dating, dancing, etc., traveling, but if this person is a family member, it can be very challenging because the hyperarousal can feel like incessant need to control, incessant need to criticize, incessant need to sort of smack you down, all these different things where it just doesn't quit. Even your expression of dismay, of displeasure, it continues. And then they have this sort of authority over others in this need for stimulation. So, and because of those structural differences, the psychopath does not learn sort of socially the way that most people do. Meaning, after you have a fight, after you have a discussion, don't do this. This is not fair to me. This is not right. This is too much, or whatever it is. The person tends to, forgive and forget very quickly and acts like this never happened, and they're just kind of back to their same ways, and they don't seem to have processed the event. They show very little emotion. They show very little remorse, very little shame or regret. And it's not normal. Some people say it's inhuman. I get a lot of questions. Peace and harmony, is this demonic? We're not here as a religious situation. It is what it is. What you have experienced is what you're experiencing. And so we're not here to label or judge. We're here to explain, inform, educate, and assist you with tools to understand what you have experienced or are experiencing, and then how to move through it in a healthy fashion. So it's to identify the experiences, identify some of the players in your experiences, understand the cause that's created this, and to help to separate and remove you from any sort of negative or deleterious effect, but to help you to process it and sort of put it in its place. It is what it is, and help reduce it down to the manageable and get it stable in your life. So the hyper arousal is combined, not only do they engage in this sort of hyper arousal to feel quote unquote connected to others, because they don't feel just sort of a heart to heart connection. There's an absence, there's a gulf, between you and them, when that hyper arousal is not sort of participated in or in the now, but the body of the individual is in that hyper aroused state that they have sort of trained, conditioned, and programmed them to live in. So it can be things that they say, looks that they give, how they touch you, where and when. All those different factors play into the effect, but largely it is exhibited or experienced as one of boundary violation. Boundaries that you didn't know that you have or should have, or how to enforce. So during the deception phase, one's boundaries are let down. You are open and vulnerable. Vulnerable meaning open to the wound, And so it's very important that you learn what vulnerability is, what it feels like when you let your guard down, when you're open, but how to use the role of metacognition to think about what you're thinking about. In other words, to become aware, enlarge this capacity and enact it and get it sort of, living in that higher consciousness space so you can become aware of when you're vulnerable versus unaware of when you were made vulnerable. So to know that you've been made sort of unaware is to realize that you took the bait, you bit the carrot, you bit the apple, you took the, the carrot, from the stick. In other words, you bit the bait, you took the bait. You launched at them. You participated in the hyperarousal unknowingly. You thought that this was the way to get through things, or that this was rewarding for you if it was a love interest, or that you were abiding by their sort of commands, if you will, during this hyperarousal state. Excuse me. Sorry. Excuse me. I just have like an itch. Okay. There we go. Anyway, so understanding that, the hyperarousal, when it is being enacted on you, when you are in the midst of it, when you're in the thick of it, meaning that you're going along with it, you've jumped on the crazy train, or you're part of the psychopathic hyperarousal flow, which meaning you're out for the dinners, you're participating in the texts that break you down and disrupt your sleep. You're being distracted and then having to sort of multitask and trying to focus on your life and your track and your values while not being pulled off track by this individual. It's literally a very deleterious or negative situation because this individual is essentially bored. They don't have anything better to do. They just don't sit down and focus and work on their relationships to feel like you have something there. Even after the hyperarousal, you feel like that there's nothing there. You don't have anything together. Even though, quote unquote, you've had 100 dinners, 1,000 dates, 100 meetings, you just don't feel like there's a connection. There's this feeling of the energy when it's sort of exuded, and the psychopath will attest to this. They know when they flip the switch on. The charisma, when they flip the mask on, when they're sort of in their persona, playing the part. It's you just kind of feel that you're with them, but yet there's sort of even though the body knows best and your subconscious knows to be afraid, but you're buying into the hyperarousal or going along with it because it seems like if you don't know how to identify it, i.e. you're vulnerable, you've opened yourself up to the wound, you don't know what boundaries you have because you've trusted them, and you can let down your boundaries and be, quote unquote, yourself, authentic, because that's where the psychopath meets you, is sort of at that you need me, connection. So that's how they kind of, they scope out their victims, and they're able to assess, subconsciously, what does this person need? Because they don't have feelings, emotions of their own that they are trying to establish and connect with. They're just sort of, on this need for stimulation. They push others beyond the limit, and they oftentimes, you can't keep up with them. And so they don't show you their other sides, so you don't kind of know the full big picture. But there's a feeling that even though you've engaged with the hyperarousal, that there's just something that is not there. There's something that is absent. The floor drops out. There's just something that isn't holding everything up. Yet you, quote unquote, have a relationship. There is a disconnect between the emotional energy, the energy in motion, which is not housed in the body of the psychopath. That's why a lot of people experience it as vampiric. Some say demonic, cruel, unfathomable. It's because, within the body, emotional body, there is not a big emotional body, if any, in the psychopath. In my feeling, there's, an emotional body where, you can, for example, if you feel somebody grieving the loss of another, they're crying, you can feel their emotions, you feel it within, there's a connection. With the psychopath, it's just kind of like there isn't that connection, yet there's this hyper arousal. So it kind of, it's very difficult to explain. So, but I'm trying to articulate it so you can understand your own experience of why it feels vapid or empty. So you just kind of feel like a stepping stone or as an object that got them from A to B. And it's very dehumanizing, meaning inhuman. What is to be human? Ask yourself that. What does it mean to be human? In terms of humanity, what is humanity? What is that all about? Human, ask yourself, what does humanity mean to you? And to understand that not all participate in that experience. And so the hyper-arousal oftentimes can get you hyper-aroused, where you're sort of perceiving things the way that this individual wants you to perceive them. You're sort of trying to be imprinted like silly putty. You're trying to be, they want you to sort of imprint with their perverted, distorted, hyper-aroused way of thinking, which is oftentimes devoid of values, that humanity value, but it's more based on that hyper-arousal need for stimulation to offset boredom, sort of track, or energy. You have to look at things as energy. Look at things as energy. So the hyper-arousal really serves as a way to get you addicted, to get you really sort of needing this person where you don't feel right if you're not with them. There is this, psychopathic bond, if you will. It is not attachment. It is not, in my viewpoint, and a lot of viewers feel the same way, it's not a true relationship where they're here themselves, you see what's going on. Even if someone who's themselves, they might have a lot of opinions, etc., at least that's truly who they are and how they feel. What you see is what you get. So think about some of those individuals who you know. Just what you see is what you get. It is, there's a transparency. But with a psychopath, there is not this transparency, until maybe they'll tell you, give you certain clues, and they'll say things, I'm, not like everybody. I am asexual. Not everybody thinks the way that you do. I can feel this energy, exuding out from all of my pores. So they will tell you things, what it's like to be them, and how they sort of flip on the deceptive switch. And this sort of can sort of be, I would say, just sort of paralyzing to people. It puts them into a fawn state. It's very difficult to articulate this intangible. The intangible, meaning that they have a way to sort of exude energy and combine it with sort of a vision, if you will. In order, I call it kind of throwing energy, or it's different from projection, but directly from a psychopath. It's a way that they kind of can play with your mind games, the way that they position their body, their expressions, and their sort of connection to perceptions or visions that they want you to hold that aren't present, that engages you in this sort of, it can be a fine line between paranoia, arousal, fascination, curiosity, and connection, which is there's a whole bunch of different emotions going on, which are, in my viewpoint, aren't really meant to be experienced simultaneously. It just treads on that, we're not supposed to combine all this into one experience. Violation, energy, unwanted or self-sabotaging or self-deprecating or self-violationary energy. And the way that they'll combine it, you have to be very aware of their hidden commands. We are going so deep, okay? So the hidden commands, meaning they come off as this good guy, good gal, charismatic, charming, just, your best, they're just, just have this sort of omniscient feeling where you're sort of glue-like, you want to stay transfixed, you want to stay glued to them, and you don't know why. It's a psychopath will tell you it's kind of like watching a train wreck. That's the experience. In other words, you can't take your eyes off of it. You want to see what happens next. And it's very different from, maybe a movie that you're watching. It creates a different sort of engagement in others where they're just sort of numbed out, where they're just sort of, they're then sort of in almost a hypnotic state. Where then they become sort of hypnotized by this very different hyperstimulation or hyper arousal of this individual. Hypnotic meaning, they have opened up your consciousness so that you can then participate in these commands. So a command might be, you might have a question for them, and they are then replying to you. So it's like embedded commands, if you will. They will give you statements, just to sort of dissect this, is to say, they'll be positively reflecting on someone who is self-deprecating. In other words, they might say, that guy is so funny the way he always puts himself down. In other words, they then might, make it or give you the subconscious command that it's adorable for you to be self-deprecating. It's adorable for you to be regressive. It's adorable for you to be submissive. It's adorable for you to be docile in their presence. So they want you to be just sort of like zombie-like, or, just sort of in that sort of puppy mode. In other words, where they have, you at that regressed puppy or kitten-like state where they can then train you, program you to do certain things, which are then on the command self-deprecating and self-sabotaging, but even more strong than that, if that makes any sense. In other words, to please me, you must self-deprecate, and you must accept the idea that you are inferior, that you are the object, the criticism that they then, that they then basically serve up, that you are accepting and agreeing to. So you're unwittingly, unknowingly signing off on the fact that you are incapable, shameful, needing of their support, acknowledging that they are the one who are above and beyond you always. So they have this way of sort of having you acknowledge and validate with sprinkled with pleasure and sprinkled with devotion and loyalty, that you are going to self-sabotage yourself and keep yourself in that sort of docile, dysfunctional, sort of shut down yet in pleasure zone state. So it's very much like a drug, or as I've spoken to in the past, that it's almost like a combination of different chemicals in a beaker that should not be combined. You become like a human beaker to these individuals, where they're just playing, what makes them bubble up, what makes them shut down, what makes them turn purple, what makes them turn blue, all these different things. And then they're just, doing this to offset their boredom. And then meanwhile, they're doing this to 2, 3, 4, 10 other people, or have all sorts of different things going on, and they're just not available to fulfill their commitment or their promise, or, complete their relationship for the persona with which they have portended or displayed to you. In other words, the significant other never really was a significant other. The big manager, or is not that. The parent is not that. The sibling is not that. So it really feels, a lot of people just can't really then, because of this combination, it's very difficult for them to come to terms and then return back to a state of wholeness and health and focus, which is the goal of the channel, is to help you get there through to the other side on a clean sweep. It does take time. It's important to understand sort of what you've been through, how your body has physiologically reacted, how you have emotionally reacted, how your processing has reacted, and how you have been affected. It's important that you articulate and understand and communicate that, such as in a community like this, with people who get it. So your communication isn't falling on the ears of like, yeah, that happens to everybody. And you're like, no, this is different, and you don't and then it's very scary because, oftentimes you find yourself in a state that you don't know how to get out of, or that you feel that you've been gaslighted or brainwashed on a severe level that you can't pull yourself out of. It can be it can be hard to focus. That hyper arousal can be overstimulating. It can be very terrorizing because it will then get people to behave out of character. They feel that they've been hypnotized to do certain things. I would never, perceive things in this way. I would never go after them. I wouldn't be calling them at this time. I would not be texting them. I would not be having a tantrum. These are all results of this experience. So it's like your body's trying to fight back for normalcy, even though you can't consciously or verbally process what your needs are. Your body's just trying to get back to homeostasis, functioning, and just being itself, living directly from its own seed. Like, your seed of who you are is always there, but sometimes that they shut out the sunlight, they shut out the water, they remove the soil, they take away the fertilizer, they put in toxins, they put in different poisons where certain things can't grow. But oftentimes the poisons that they put in the soil are the experiences and ingredients that you need to grow, i.e. one of acceptance, truth, and validation, into human, just a respect of boundaries, of who you are, your I am, your experience as an individual. They just sort of help yourself to your entire being, gobble it up, and it's just like, thank you very much. Wipe their mouth, and then they just get going on, and you're just leaving there like, really? You just took apart my guts, my heart, and 3/4 of my brain, and my arm is broken, but you want me to get up and run after you, and I, have 4 toes left. It's just, you feel incapable of confronting, yet you're combined with, you're wanting them to sort of undo the concoction that they have left you with. Concoction of dismay, discouragement, confusion, fear, desire, misperception of things around the psychopathic mind, once again. So to help you get through this is to identify the causes created this effect, and to realize that it's done deliberately, pre-calculated, and with intention. So once again, it's important to understand that these individuals, their manipulation is deliberate, it is calculated, it is intentional. And so it's kind of like delivering everything, all this, with a smile that you're still wanting to connect with, yet it's, laughable that how did you do all this? So there's this feeling of like, maybe I should be impressed how badly they got me, So it's a very strange connection and combination. You need to understand that you are separate and need to remain separate and distinct and whole and individual, and resensitize yourself to normalcy. I talk about resensitizing all the senses. So think of all of your senses and really work on them, particularly that which are kinesthetic, healthy walking, affirmations, speaking, I am, getting your sense of self back as it is distinct, separate, and non-negotiable or influenceable from this other individual. As crude, difficult as it might seem, this is my spouse, this is my mother, this is my sister, it's my brother, it's my ex-wife, it's the mother or father of my children. All these different things you need to have 100% clean cut off between your energy, your thought pattern, your needs, your self-esteem, and that is a continual safety and security in homeostasis as separate and distinct from them entirely. Just as you would not, swallow something that would be harmful to you, you don't want to intake and absorb and digest their stuff. Number one rule when you talk about healing from a psychopath is you don't want to think like them. You do not. Even though they have enigma, puzzle, fascination, oh my gosh, it seemed like this fantasy world, it seemed like this illusion, poof. It's gone and you're left sitting there in the ashes like, how did I get here? Well, it's kind of like that's what it's like to be in a psychopathic experience. Stay with your feet on the ground and remember your life is going to get good, juicy, exciting, wonderful, and rewarding once you stay out of it and you make that proclamation and declaration and commitment to yourself to be able to think, feel, breathe clearly and in a cool, calm, collected, peaceful body. That is okay. You have permission. Distinguish and separate yourself. And look at my other videos on more tools, but I want you to understand the cause has created this effect and realize that you can, remove and detoxify from that hyper arousal and get your focus and your alignment, with all your energy centers back and own it and being able to live freely without fear of sort of falling back. It's your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today. I hope that these videos do help. Please share, subscribe, and please donate for more great tools, videos, discussion, and support. Have a beautiful day. More later.